live on YouTube with the August 13th edition of the Node.js release working group. Beth, do you want to take it away?
Yep, sure. So we will be following the agenda, which is in the Node.js release issue number 599. And I'll just start with, are there any announcements that anyone has and would like to make?
I have an announcement. It's very short, but Node 14.8.0 went out on Tuesday, and with it came top level await being unflagged, which I'm extremely excited about. That is all.
Good.
Awesome. Okay, we'll move on to the first item on the agenda. I know, Richard, you added this one. This one's from a discussion over in Node.js Node, which is the special treatment for package JSON resolution. Richard, I don't know if you want to start that discussion as you added it.
Sure. So this circles back to when we unflagged ESM in Node 12. I can't remember the version off the top of my head. But we did discuss prior to unflagging if there were risks to the ecosystem, and we did discuss various scenarios that could occur. And what we said was that we'd go out, we'd see what the fallout is, and if needs be, we could add a flag back in. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have to add a flag back in, but there has definitely been feedback in this issue as to the change affecting the ecosystem. It's a bit hard to gauge how widespread, but you know, at least someone has felt strongly enough about it to start questioning whether the risks were assessed before unflagging. And I think, you know, we can say that we did assess the risks. I guess the question to discuss here is, was there anything else we could have done, or you know, are we happy with the state of things at the moment? You know, it's a tricky one because obviously there's the module side of things, and then there's also the node side of things. But ultimately, it is an observable change in behavior.
I still challenge that framing of it as an observable change in behavior, and see it much more as a programming error, to be honest. Because the package that they were claiming they were having problems with is able to fix this problem so that those versions of Node can work. And I get, like, I see how it is an observable change in behavior that, like, when they move from one version of Node to the other version of Node, the code does execute differently because of the support of exports, which didn't exist before. And I guess that's non-deniable, but it's like, I struggle to see it as at the scale that it was being presented personally. Although I do recognize and empathize with the frustration of having things break and losing time to having to figure it out. You know, that is definitely less than ideal.
Well, I mean, just off the top of my head, random things. I don't really understand enough of it. I mean, for example, better diagnostics or something to explain what's going on. Because I think part of the issue was something happened and it wasn't obvious in the beginning why.
But if I recall correctly, what happened was that a project introduced exports, but they didn't do it properly. And then the problem was they were using a beta version of Fetch, I believe. And the beta version of Fetch had a broken implementation of imports because they didn't include the package JSON. And a later beta included it, and then it was fine. And I think there was like another tool from Jest or Facebook that was expecting package JSONs to live in a certain way, that there was also an upstream change landing to fix that problem. So, you know, like, I guess one of the things that I think is most important there to take from it, Richard, that you were mentioning is is there more that we could have done, or is there something different we could have done to educate people on this? Yeah. And I guess, like, at the core for me, it's like we add new features to LTS all the time. We have change logs, we have blogs, we discussed it, we have documentation. We did get feedback when we unflagged it about some of the documentation around exports not being sufficient in describing the ways that it could break. and we wrote extensive documentation to help, improve that. I think
Was
that,
in, so I was going to say, was that in master or was that for 12?
as far as I know, that the update to the documentation around exports made its way back to 12 already.
Okay.
So it's like, it's one of the things that I struggle with here a little bit is that like, people don't always read the docs. People don't read every single piece of information that we put out there. So one way that we've tried to be improving this as well is having better error messages. And I think that's honestly one of the best ways in which we can improve these things. Oh, do I need to promote someone? Apologies. Hi, Darcy. I think in the case of this feature, and it was something that I was mentioning, I think it would be far more disruptive to bring the flag back at this point than remove the flag. I think that for our ecosystem long term, having modules on 12 like significantly outweighs the breakages that folks may have experienced. But I think it would be naive to say that like, some folks were like, not everyone was enthusiastic about us deciding to do this. But I think like, and I stand by it, it's like an individual module chooses to opt into exports and is like defining their interface. And if they use that feature incorrectly, that is a programming error in that module. I don't see that as a problem with Node. And if a module is using exports correctly and in a non-breaking way, like the module should not be breaking in a non-semver major if the module itself is using the interface appropriately.
How long is the flag been? How long has it been unflagged? I can't remember when that 12 release went out. Like, if it's any longer than a couple of months, then it definitely sounds like it'd be more disruptive to go back and unflag it.
Yeah, we did it in May. End of May, in 12.17.0.
Right.
And I think it's worth pointing out as well, and I'm not trying to be defensive here, so I'm trying to like find the balance, but like it also was released to like a lot of people who were super excited about it, and many people are very happy to see the change. So it's like also finding a balance there of like, the feedback versus the positivity around it, I think is important, because more folks, like folks who are broken are more likely to show up and like talk about what problems they've run into than people who everything's working fine for. Because, arguably all of the other apps on 12 that didn't break, no one's coming by and saying, hey, it didn't break.
Yeah, I guess it's reassuring that we can pinpoint like one or two notable examples rather than masses of broken apps.
Yeah, and I think that was like kind of the key. And to me, the biggest takeaway that I think I would love to have from this, and Richard, please let me know, if you agree or if you want to collaborate on this, is like, I think it would be good to follow back up with the person who opened this issue and like try to work with them to figure out like, okay, how could, like, are there things that we could have done? Can you enumerate them for us? Like, what are things how could we have done a better job of letting folks know this stuff? Because there's also like a point of diminishing returns in communications, and like not everyone reads everything. So it'd be good to really get to the bottom of like, is there actually like a really distinct actionable thing that we could have done differently aside from just like not adopting this change altogether?
Yeah, okay, that sounds fair to me. Yeah, I mean, my main concern was just making sure that, if somebody out there has it seemed that they had quite a strong view on this. So just to make sure that we at least consider and address, and by address, it could be like you say, going back and initiating dialogue as to, what they think what concrete things we could have done better, not rather than just a nebulous, consider the risks, because we did consider the risks. And, the conclusion was that we felt that it was acceptable to go ahead with the removal, the flag removal. So yeah, yeah, okay.
Would you like to take the action item of following up with the person who opened the issue, or would you like me to do that?
Sure. No, I'll comment in the
Yeah,
issue.
I mean, something we could do as well is we could invite them to come to one of these meetings to give us feedback, but maybe they prefer to give it privately.
Yes,
or in the issue.
indeed.
Oh, and for what it's worth, Richard, I'm pretty sure you were in the meeting, but maybe not. I brought this up at the TSC as well to just make sure that people were aware that this conversation had happened and that we were discussing it in the release working group. So for anyone who's just listening, just making it clear, like I think my bias here is super obvious, but like with that bias aside, like I'm doing my best to make sure this is getting escalated to the right people and folks are hearing about it and we're taking it seriously. And just because I may disagree with something doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve a discussion.
For the record, I don't think I was in the TSC meeting, but I do remember reading the minutes, because in the issue I did when it was mentioned in the issue that the risks weren't considered, I did quote both the release working group minutes and the TSC minutes, where it was brought to the attention of the two groups that there was a risk involved in unflagging, and we still decided to go ahead. So it wasn't that we didn't consider it.
To clarify, I meant like this particular comment from this individual that we're discussing now. I brought that up in last week's TSC meeting, so that the TSC is aware that this conversation happened, that people brought this feedback. The conversation is aware. And traditionally, like what I've seen end up happening from the TSC is that they don't really get too involved in the module stuff because like it is turtles all the way down, to say it nice. But like, one thing that's worth mentioning is like we had the Collab Summit in December, and whether or not we should unflag an LTS was actually like an extensive conversation that was held between myself and a number of TSC members and release working group members. Beth, I'm not 100%, but I think maybe you participated in some of those conversations. I know Guy Bedford was really active in them and James Snell was. So like, it was, there was a lot of time kind of spent thinking about this and framing it, and a recognition that we were taking a philosophical position about it that folks may disagree with.
Sure. Okay. I guess we got an action on that one. Just to figure out how maybe we could have communicated better, or if there's something specific we could have done, but no plans to revert the unflagging. So I think we can move on to the next one, which is in the node release repo. It's the current should include 12.13. So I opened a PR yesterday. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. To update the dates for node 16, because I realized we only had the dates for 15, and with 15 coming out in a couple of months, we should probably look ahead a little bit further to arrange the dates. So I've opened that PR, and while I opened it, I was looking at the timings. First realized that the major release was set for a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday, which isn't something we've done before, so I changed that back to a Tuesday. But we've had this ongoing kind of discussion about whether the transition for 14, so the even numbered release, should happen before 15 comes out, or the odd numbered release comes out, or after. Both ways. So in the case where 15 is released before 14 becomes LTS, we end up in a situation where we have multiple current releases. And if we do it the other way, we end up with no current release. The reason this kind of appeared in the first place is because at the time, the Node.js org website didn't really handle this situation, the small window where these things aren't necessarily in the order you'd expect them to be. And it wasn't showing, I think it either was showing the same version or was showing the wrong version or something like that. But we fixed that, so it should be able to determine correctly. I think what it does at the moment is it hides the current release when we don't have a current release. But yeah, the question is, do we think it's better to have a time frame where we have multiple current releases, or a time frame where there's no current release? So this is just an order of operations thing. Do we want the major to come out and then the previous release line to transition to LTS, or do we want the transition to LTS to happen before the new major?
So I guess if I had to pick one, I think that having two currents at the same time is fine, truthfully. So like cutting the current first, then promoting 14 to LTS afterwards seems like a fairly reasonable order of operations that just makes it like a little bit easier to like wrap your head around. I do think that while it's good to be thoughtful and consistent about the order that we do here, like I do think that we should just like not spend too much time debating it. Not like, I mean, not that we don't have time to debate it today, but more just like,
Yep.
I think that it's very semantic heavy, and like it really only matters for a week, and really only truly matters, in my personal opinion, in the context of like the rendering of the website. I think that like, you know, the labels of current and LTS mean a lot more to me about like, what is the release strategy of the thing? And I don't think like there is ever an intention, at least, to say, hey, there's the current means it is the current. There's only one current release. So I think, and similarly, I don't think LTS means it's the only LTS. We have multiple LTSs. It's definitely confusing if, and I think the situation that we found ourselves in before that was weird, where it was like, we cut the LTS before we cut the current. So like, I think it was like version like 12.7 was current, but version 12.8 was LTS. And that just like looked weird and feels weird.
Yep.
So like, to avoid that situation where the latest current release is actually behind the latest LTS release, doing the current release first seems to be less confusing for people.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of the impact on the schedule, it does mean that the transition for Node 14 to active LTS will likely be pushed back to around the 27th of October, and the 15x release will be around the 20th of October. Are there any concerns with pushing that out?
Can you say the date one more time that you wanted to push out?
So the active LTS start date for Node 14 to around the 27th of October.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. Sure, I can update. So the PR I have open, I will update directly after this meeting to account for that. And now is probably a good time. It was the next thing on our agenda, I think, to quickly review the schedules. So if we look at 14, where are we today? Yeah. So 14.8, did that go out? I think it did. Yep.
Announcement.
Yep. Was that this week? Yeah. Yes, yeah. It was. It was a await stuff. Yep. So the next one in the pipeline is going to be prepared by Danielle, pairing with me. So I've just got an action there to reach out and find a time to start building up that release. Looks like afterwards we don't actually have anyone scheduled. So if people have time, feel free. But what I will do is I will bump the 14x date to the correct new date, which will be the 27th of October. And we should.
I think for 12, did we not do a release and then the LTS release just flipped the bit?
Yeah.
So is that what we're doing for this transition, as in that the release on the 6th of October would be the LTS release, but without the bit set? Or do we want to do a release before flipping the bit? I guess how much time do we want between flipping the bit? Because obviously things will build up, which won't be in the transition release.
Right.
So whatever the release is before the LTS transition, how much gap do we want? I suppose, do we want the 2 weeks because that's what the LTS policy says? I mean, does the 2 weeks start the 2 weeks before the LTS transition starts, or 2 weeks from when the LTS transition starts?
So I guess like this is maybe like a meta question that we haven't really made into policy before, which was like, do we want to like slow down and let it bake a bit before we do the initial LTS release? Right? Like, is that kind of what you're asking, Richard?
What I'm asking is, I think for 12, and I can't remember what we did for 10, but definitely for 12, we deliberately tried to make it so that the LTS transition, the only thing it did was flip the LTS bit and add the code name. So there were no additional changes that went in from the previous release.
Yeah.
And
so
I'm okay with that, as long as the rest of us are okay that 6th of October release, the one immediately before that will be the last sort of normal current release where changes go in, and then the LTS release, nothing new goes into that LTS release, which means then that there will be I don't know how long gap between that 6.10 and the next time anything updates in the 14 line.
Yeah, so I guess what I was gonna say is I don't see those two things as mutually exclusive. Like specifically that like if 10.27 is when we're talking about transitioning to LTS, I think the big question is like, well, it is current before that. Are we saying that like we specifically want to have like a 2 week period where we're not allowing anything to land? If we're not saying that, then like in theory we could land stuff and do 10.x releases up until the day before 10.27 if there's things that we want to do, because current releases don't have like we do it every week or every other week just to kind of like have a cadence that makes sense, but that's not actually like a commitment of that release line. We can do releases whenever we want.
The other thing that would feed into it is, for example, if we didn't drop. So if that 6th of October release was the last time we dropped things in for a while into 14, that might make generating the change log for 15 easier, because 14 will be effectively frozen for a bit while we generate the 15 release.
Yeah, that was my thinking. I was going to add that. I was going to say, if we were to schedule one in between, it kind of means that we add work, having to re-update the change log, etc.
So one thing that we could potentially do with this in thinking about it, so like if 10.06 is the last non-LTS release, and then what was the date for 15? It was like
the 20th.
The 20th?
Yeah.
So let me see here. Hold on. So 8/11 was yesterday, and then 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks. So if 15 comes out on the 20th, that gives us like, I guess the challenge there is that creates like a 2 week gap where like we don't have anything going out, but like we do have 15 then going out. We could have an RC for the next version of 14 that could go out like a week after the 27th, and aim to basically have a release of 10 going out 2 weeks after the release of 14, but make that a like a Semver minor, like a Semver patch release.
Yeah.
Because that could minimize like, because I guess theoretically, right, like we want 14 to now start transitioning and being LTS. That gives enough time for like things to be on 15 for 2 weeks before they would land on 14, and stops it from like, get like having like 2 full months between releases.
Yep. I do quite like the buffer that gives us in terms of making the 15 release a bit more seamless, but okay, we can pencil that down for now, and depending on what happens.
I guess what are we doing about 12 in maintenance? I guess that's just next.
Yep. Let's hop through. So there was a 12 release plan. There's one planned for August, a minor, but we've not had anyone's. The release candidate was due this week, but people have limited time, so we've not got to it yet.
Okay, I could maybe help with that.
Yeah, I guess we want to keep the minor kind of as early as we can before LTS, I think. I guess. Before maintenance, sorry.
So that was supposed to have, I guess, okay. Maybe what we could do is our next release meeting is in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I could aim to have an RC together at the very least before that. I don't know if I'll be able to get the whole thing done, but I can at least get started on it, and hopefully have enough that like we can audit and review December minor changes. I personally want to go through, and there's like some refactors and changes to modules that I'd love to make sure gets on 12.
Okay, should I bump the RC date to about the 25th?
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
And then
the one thing that's worth mentioning is I am moving that week, the week of the 24th. So I'll be able to make the release meeting, but I may need like some help with like getting this over the finish line. So I can help like this week and next week. But maybe, I don't know, Richard, would you have bandwidth to like pair on this?
Yeah, possibly.
Okay, so maybe we could just take it to the issues and I can get started on backporting some stuff and then we can take it from there.
okay.
I think that like one of the things that definitely is going to be interesting here to kind of like, at least for me wrapping my head around it, is this is the first LTS that we flipped maintenance and active. I think the amount of traction that we're seeing on like maintaining this branch really reflects that it's a good thing we made that change. But I also think something that's rather interesting here is that, at least for me personally, 14 is like one of the more exciting new release lines that we've had in a while, since like kind of 8. So I think it'll be really interesting looking at adoption metrics when we switch to LTS and seeing if we have like a much faster adoption of 14 than we've had of other LTSs in the past. I have an intuition that we will.
Okay. Yeah.
Fix the download metrics by then.
Yeah, Richard, do you know where we're at on getting those metrics fixed?
He's still hammering away at it, but yeah, he's still having problems.
Yeah, I've been working with Ash. We're hitting some really weird streams right after end errors intermittently in Google Cloud. So we're trying to debug those.
So that was something that I was trying to, I don't know if I did a good job of framing. It's like, I would advise against using streams in Google Cloud because of the way of streaming HTTP and the way in which they terminate traffic.
Okay.
So it would be better to just like, if you're reading files or something, to just use like a non-stream based. I can look at the code again. I think like I looked and gave a review, and there's like when you return, the function will like shut down. So you need to make sure that like all your work is done before you like return.
Oh yeah, we managed to get past that point.
Okay.
It now runs, it generates the file. So the stream seemed like the whole stream transforms and stuff seemed to be working absolutely fine. It's just after an undetermined amount of time, things will start to error, and it's hard for us to even diagnose what part of the stream was broken.
And are you using Cloud Functions for this?
Yeah, and we're using like the file event that it's kicked off every time it sees a new file kind of thing.
Yeah, it might. And maybe we can just have a pairing session here, and I can also try to grab someone from the Google team. It might make sense to maybe move this service either to App Engine or to Cloud Run. And I believe Cloud Run can subscribe to the same events. I could be mistaken, but at the very least, there's like a pub sub thing that we could set up. Like, so you could have the function just serve as like a proxy for kicking off a pub sub, and the pub sub could then trigger a different job. But Cloud Run has a lot more granularity as far as like controlling the life cycle, the size of the job, how much parallelism is going on and stuff like that. And it may even also make sense to explore maybe using a function to put things into like a task queue or something like that, and then have those processed independently.
Okay.
There's a couple different ways that we could look at the architecture here that might make it more reliable.
Should I reach out to Ash and ask if we want to maybe set up an hour at some point over the next couple of weeks or 3 or 4 weeks or so to pair on it?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm going to send you a link that can just show you my schedule.
Okay, awesome.
I just sent it to you on chat.
Cool. Yep, I will. Yeah, I'll reach out to Ash. That sounds really good. And we can help out the build team and try and get that. Because it will in turn help us get some insights into the release lines. I hope. Sorry, Richard, you're a bit faint.
Sorry, I think there is quite a few people waiting on having working metrics.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay, so that covers 14 and 12. 10, I've just kind of left that open so that people can beg for a new 10 release if there's some super critical bugs or something needs to make it into the release, just somewhere where they can actually make that request. And let me hop back to, we've reviewed the schedules. I guess the last thing is there anything anyone would like to add or announce regarding the NPM 7 beta?
I don't think at this time there's anything to really add, other than we're looking for feedback and usage over the next about 2-3 weeks for sure. We still have a lot of work to do to essentially get our test coverage up. So that'll give us a bit more sanity before we land this. So still a lot of work on our end to do.
Yeah, one thing that I would add that I think is like good to know is like we've been starting to use Sitgem and the Node infrastructure to test the integration of this version of NPM in with Node 14. And we're finding all sorts of fun bugs like one does with Canary in the Gold Mine. One of the biggest breaking changes that is in here is a change to the way in which peer deps work. And at the moment, it doesn't seem like there is super extensive ecosystem-wide breakages, although we are getting some good insight into like which tools or which workflows would be broken by this. And we're slowly kind of chipping away at the odd bugs that we're finding. And I'm pretty confident that in a short order, things will be in a place where we can start thinking about what general availability looks like and promoting this out of beta. I think there's just a little bit more work that we want to do before we open a pull request to bring this into master, just to make sure like that, we have like a baseline of stability, but we're getting close, which is exciting.
Awesome.
Okay, is there anything else anyone wants to add or raise, discuss? No? Okay, well, if there's not, I guess thanks for joining everyone and speak to you all a bit later.
All right, thank you.